Tiuda. My father hurled me across a glass table at my sister's wedding, then the video hit 5M views. Bonem toi look qua mot cheek bon kin tidam koi qua mgai, saudu video. 5 true view. Thumbnail text, my father gave my sister my house at her wedding. I said no. He hurled me through a glass table in front of everyone. He didn't know a guest was live streaming. 5 million people watched me bleed. Bo toi tang na qua toi cho mgai tidam koi qua no. Toi noi kong. Ong tanem toi shun qua mot cheek bon kin truok mat moi nuoi. Ong ta kong beat mot vi kok dang livestream. 5 true nuoi de zem toi che mao. My father gave my sister my house at her wedding. I said no. He hurled me through a glass table in front of everyone. He didn't know a guest was live streaming. 5 million people watched me bleed. I stood near the service entrance of the grand ballroom at the Summit Crown Hotel, a position I always favored. It was close to the exit, and you could observe the entire ecosystem of the room without being swept into its current. The air in Arbor Town was supposed to be thin and crisp, high-altitude purity, but in here, it was incredibly thick. The ballroom was suffocating in luxury, a cavern of shimmering crystal and heavy silk draperies. The scent was overpowering. Thousands of wild mountain flowers had been trucked in and arranged to look effortless, mingling with the yeasty tang of vintage champagne and the faint, sweet rot of too much expensive perfume. I held a glass of water, the ice long melted. The crystal chandeliers above us threw fractured light onto the polished stone floor. As an architectural restoration specialist, I knew this room was technically flawless in its design. It was also a beautiful, incredibly expensive lie. The room and the 280 guests within it revolved around a single point of light. My sister Savannah. She was 27, 4 years younger than me, and radiant. Her beauty was almost aggressive in its perfection. Her white silk dress wasn't just worn, it was inhabited, clinging to her like a second skin. She laughed, a sound cultivated to be both musical and infectious, and the circle of admirers around her tightened, drawn in by her gravity. She was the center of everything. She always had been. Wyatt, her new husband, stood beside her, looking handsome and slightly overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the production he had married into. I watched, feeling the familiar role settle over me like an old, heavy coat. I was 31 years old. I was the quiet one, the functional one, the one who knew how to fix broken things. I was the shadow that made Savannah's brightness possible. Then the sound came. A sharp, metallic ringing that cut through the music. My father, Vincent, was tapping his champagne flute with a silver spoon. The string quartet, playing something light and forgettable, stuttered and stopped. The chatter of the 280 voices faded into an expectant hush. The atmosphere didn't just quiet down. It seized. It tightened with an attention that only I seemed to fully recognize. Vincent stood near the towering 7-tiered wedding cake, immaculate in his custom tuxedo. He beamed, the absolute picture of paternal pride and wealthy benevolence. He was a real estate mogul in Arbor Town, a man used to moving the earth to suit his vision. But I wasn't looking at his bright smile. I was smelling the air. The scent of high-end bourbon rolled off him in waves, cutting straight through the flowers and the champagne. It was a familiar warning. To everyone else, he was the charming, powerful patriarch about to give a heartwarming speech. To me, that smell was a precursor to breakage. It was the scent of a gathering storm of slammed doors and quiet tears swallowed in the dark. "Welcome," he boomed, his voice filling the cavernous room without needing a microphone. "Welcome, friends, family, and to my new son-in-law, Wyatt. We are so blessed to have you join our family." Polite applause rippled through the room. "My beautiful daughter Savannah," Vincent continued, his voice softening with practiced, theatrical emotion, "has always been a light, a joy to us all. And on this, the most important day of her life, her mother, and I wanted to give her something truly special. A foundation for the incredible life she and Wyatt will build together." The room held its breath. Guests leaned in. I saw phones being raised all around the room, their lenses hungry for the grand gesture. "We are thrilled," my father declared, spreading his arms wide like a conductor finishing a symphony to announce our gift to the happy couple. The restored house on Juniper Avenue. The air left my body. It wasn't a gasp. It was a silent, absolute vacuum. The room tilted, the chandelier lights blurring into long, sick streaks. The house on Juniper Avenue. My house. The house I had found as a collapsed ruin. The house I had poured every ounce of my savings, my sweat, and my blood into for 3 solid years. The house whose every beam, every new wire, every painstakingly restored piece of oak flooring I knew by heart. The room erupted. Cheers, whistles, and a massive wave of thunderous applause washed over the tables. "Oh, how wonderful," a woman near me whispered to her husband. "Vincent is so incredibly generous." Someone else whistled loudly. More phones came up, turning to capture Savannah's feigned, tearful surprise. They all assumed I was in on it. They clapped for my father's generosity, completely unaware they were witnessing a theft. I felt the cold wall against my back. I looked at my father, who was soaking in the applause, basking in the glow of his magnificent, impossible lie. I looked at Savannah. She was already crying beautiful, highly photogenic tears, hugging Wyatt and accepting congratulations for a prize she had absolutely no part in earning. Something inside me, a piece of internal wiring that had been frayed and sparking for decades, finally snapped. I pushed off the wall. I remembered the advice of the property lawyer I had consulted days prior. She told me I had to be there. She warned me that if I wasn't present to contradict him, he would control the narrative, painting me as a selfish, unstable daughter who backed out of a family promise. I had to be the wall that stopped the lie. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I simply began to walk. My low, practical heels clicked on the stone floor. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, cutting right through the fading applause. Click, click, click. The crowd slowly parted for me. The applause died down completely as faces turned, registering confusion. This was not in the program. The quiet, functional older sister was not supposed to take the stage. I stopped a few feet from the bridal table, directly in front of my father. His smile was still fixed in place for the cameras, but his eyes, up close, were dead and cold. The bourbon was swimming heavily in them. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low, a barely concealed warning meant only for me. "Come to congratulate your sister." I looked at him. I looked at Savannah, whose fake smile was beginning to falter. I looked at the 280 guests watching us in dead silence. I looked at the phones still pointed our way. "That is a lie," I said. My voice was incredibly clear. It didn't shake. It carried across the room. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier, and far more terrible than the applause had ever been. Vincent's face changed. The mask of the charming patriarch didn't just slip. It disintegrated. A dark, mottled flush started at his thick neck and raced up into his hairline. The bourbon ignited his temper. "What did you just say to me?" he hissed, taking a step down from the raised platform. "I said that is a lie," I repeated, louder this time, projecting my voice so the tables in the back could hear. "I never agreed to that. I am not giving away my house." "You were embarrassing your sister," he spat, taking another step toward me, jabbing a thick finger in my face. "You will not embarrass this family." "You are embarrassing yourself," I said, maintaining my ground. And I saw it then. A flash of pure, unadulterated, murderous rage in his eyes. This was the real Vincent. This was the man I had known my entire life, the monster the bourbon always eventually revealed behind closed doors. Now he was standing in the open. "It is my house," I said, my voice ringing with the clarity of a bell. "I bought it. I rebuilt it. It is mine." "Not anymore," he roared. He moved faster than a man his age and size should be able to. His hand, the same hand that had just raised a joyful toast, shot out. It wasn't a slap. It was a violent grab. His thick fingers clamped onto my shoulder like an iron hook, digging painfully into my collarbone. "You will be silent," he snarled, his face inches from mine, his breath a toxic cloud of alcohol. And then he shoved me. He didn't just push me away. He used the full, terrifying force of his body, pivoting his hips and driving his weight forward to hurl me out of his path. My feet completely left the floor. There was a sickening moment of weightlessness. The ballroom ceiling spun above me. And then came the impact. I didn't hit the floor. I flew backward directly into a massive, ornate glass table set up near the bridal party. It was a heavy, tempered glass display meant to hold the overflow of expensive wedding gifts and a towering, decorative champagne fountain. The sound of the impact was absolute devastation. It wasn't a dull thud. It was a chaotic, explosive crash of shattering glass and snapping metal that echoed through the grand ballroom like a bomb going off. My back and shoulders struck the center of the table, shattering the thick glass pane instantly. The champagne tower collapsed, sending dozens of crystal coops raining down on top of me. They shattered against the floor, against the metal framing of the table, and against my skin. I collapsed into the wreckage of silver wrapping paper, spilled champagne, and jagged, vicious shards of glass. The pain was immediate and blinding. It felt like fire tearing through my right shoulder blade and the side of my head. For one terrible second, the room was trapped in a vacuum of utter silence. No music. No breathing. Just the awful, twinkling sound of the last few pieces of broken glass settling on the stone floor. Then the screaming started. It was high, piercing, and chaotic. Multiple women shrieked. Chairs scraped violently against the stone as people jumped to their feet. I lay in the wreckage, my vision swimming. The smell of spilled alcohol and wild mountain flowers made me nauseous. I tried to push myself up on my left arm, but my right side screamed in agony. I could feel a sudden, shocking warmth spreading rapidly down the side of my face and neck. Blood. It was hot and fast, soaking into the collar of my dark dress. Through the spinning, chaotic kaleidoscope of chandelier lights and panicked guests rushing forward, my eyes desperately searched the crowd. I saw Savannah. She hadn't moved toward me. She was standing frozen, her hands over her mouth, but she wasn't looking at my bleeding head. She was looking wildly at the audience, watching her perfect, incredibly expensive narrative implode in real time. Then, my eyes shifted past the screaming relatives and locked onto something else. Near the back bar, slightly removed from the main panic, stood a young man. He hadn't dropped his drink. He hadn't lowered his hands. He was holding his phone up high, his grip rock steady, aimed directly at the wreckage of the glass table, at my bleeding face, and at my father standing over me, panting in rage. And in the upper corner of his screen, shining like a tiny, merciless beacon in the dim ballroom, was a small red light. It was steady and unblinking. It said live. To understand how a father could throw his own daughter through a table of glass in front of hundreds of people, you have to understand the architecture of our family. We were not a home, we were a highly produced stage play, and my father was the ruthless director. Looking back, I can analyze it clearly through the lens of behavioral psychology. My father, Vincent, suffered from a profound emotional bankruptcy. He had no internal sense of worth, so he had to constantly extract it from the outside world. He required a constant, adoring audience. In this ecosystem, children are not people. They're props. Savannah was cast early on as the golden child. She was beautiful, loud, and inherently understood how to reflect Vincent's desired image back to him. Her primary skill was receiving. She accepted praise, expensive gifts, and unearned opportunities with a graceful, practiced ease, as if the world owed it to her simply for existing. I, on the other hand, was cast as the scapegoat. I was the functional one, the quiet one. When things broke, I fixed them. When the narrative needed a villain or a servant, I was pushed into the role. I learned very early that my actual achievements were invisible, while Savannah's mere presence was celebrated. I remember a specific incident when I was 14 years old. I had spent 3 weeks in the garage, teaching myself how to use hand tools. I built a complex, multi-tiered birdhouse from scrap wood. It had tiny, perfectly measured shingles and a hinged roof for cleaning. I was so proud of the structural integrity. I brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen counter. Later that evening, Vincent had some of his wealthy real estate partners over for drinks. I walked into the kitchen to get water and heard him holding court. He had his hand resting on my birdhouse. "Look at this craftsmanship," he boasted to his friends, laughing heartily. I spent all weekend in the garage teaching my oldest girl how to measure and cut. A good father passes down his skills, right? The men nodded, praising his dedication. He stole my labor to build his own image. But as soon as the guests left, the charming smile vanished. He found me in my room and coldly berated me for leaving sawdust on the garage floor, telling me to throw the stupid wooden box away because it was cluttering his workspace. The very next day, Savannah came home with a report card. She had managed a C in her remedial math class. My mother, Miriam, baked a cake. Vincent took Savannah to the dealership that weekend and bought her a brand new car for her 16th birthday, praising her incredible academic effort. That was the dynamic. It wasn't just unfair, it was structurally corrupt. They demanded aesthetic perfection and loud compliance, but they actively despised the quiet, dirty work required to actually build anything real. Over the years, I stopped trying to earn their praise. I realized you cannot cash a check at a bank that is emotionally bankrupt. So, I learned how to do without. I learned how to be self-sufficient. I learned how to be a ghost in my own home, absorbing their dismissals and turning them into a cold, hard armor. I left that toxic theater when I was 19. I couldn't breathe the air in that house anymore. It felt like suffocating slowly in velvet. I packed 2 duffel bags, walked out the front door without saying goodbye, and rented a tiny, miserable apartment above a noisy hardware store. The air perpetually smelled of cut pipe and paint thinner, but to me, it smelled like absolute freedom. The reality of independence was grueling. While Savannah was being sent on luxury trips to Europe to find herself on Vincent's credit card, I was working 60 hours a week. From 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, I was a barista, burning my hands on industrial espresso wands and living off stale pastries. From 4 in the afternoon until midnight, I worked as a runner for a commercial architectural firm. I fetched blueprints, hauled heavy sample books across town, and absorbed absolutely everything I could about structure, load-bearing walls, and historical restoration. I did this for 6 straight years. I saved every single dollar that didn't go toward rent or cheap ramen noodles. I didn't buy clothes. I didn't go to bars. I was fueled by a dark, resilient anger that I carefully forged into determination. My dream wasn't glamorous. I didn't want a shiny penthouse or a modern condo. I wanted something they couldn't touch. When I was 25, I found it. 47 Juniper Avenue. It was a massive, Victorian-era disaster. The city had condemned it. The roof had caved in over the kitchen, the foundation was cracked, and the wraparound porch was literally peeling away from the facade like dead skin. The neighbors looked at it as a haunted eyesore. I looked at the solid, old-growth timber bones beneath the rot and saw a fortress. I drained my bank account, bought it for cash, and moved in. My family thought I was insane. Miriam called it a disgusting pile of garbage. Vincent laughed and said I would be bankrupt and begging to come home within 6 months. That first winter was a brutal test of my sanity. The furnace was a rusted hulk sitting in a flooded basement. I couldn't afford to replace it yet. I lived entirely in the attic, the only space with an intact ceiling. I sealed the single small window with thick plastic sheeting and slept on a cheap air mattress. I piled 3 heavy moving blankets on top of myself and slept in my winter coat and a beanie. I would wake up in the pitch dark, the temperature hovering near freezing, my breath pluming in the air. The glass of water next to my bed would regularly freeze solid overnight. My joints ached with a deep, penetrating cold that felt like it was settling permanently into my bones. But every morning, I would get up, go to my 2 jobs, and come back to the ruin to work by the harsh glare of a portable generator until my fingers were too numb to hold a hammer. I was building my own foundation. Fixing the house was agonizing, back-breaking labor. I didn't hire a crew. I became the crew. You cannot heal the skin until the skeleton is sound, so I started in the dark, damp crawl spaces. I spent weeks on my knees in the dirt, learning how to mix mortar by hand. I learned the precise ratio of sand to cement to lime, getting the consistency right by the feel of it through my heavy work gloves. I sistered new beams to rotten joists. I pulled miles of heavy-gauge electrical wire through walls I framed myself. During this time, I met Julian. He was a 35-year-old independent contractor who occasionally bought coffee at my cafe. He saw me studying local building codes on my breaks. He didn't offer pity or unearned praise. He offered knowledge. He came by the house on his days off, bringing heavy equipment I couldn't afford to rent, and taught me the intricate logic of load-bearing framing and roof pitch. He became my only real friend, a silent ally who respected the sweat on my brow. The labor pushed me to my physical limits, but it also cemented my psychological boundaries. There was one specific incident that solidified my armor forever. I was 27, 2 years into the renovation. I was working alone late on a Tuesday night, standing on a small, wobbly interior scaffold, trying to patch a high section of damaged drywall in the main hallway. I overreached. The scaffold shifted abruptly on the uneven subfloor. I fell hard, twisting to avoid landing on my neck. I crashed into a pile of discarded, nail-studded lumber. A rusty, thick framing nail tore a deep, jagged gash down my calf. The pain was blinding. I lay in the dust, bleeding heavily, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone. In a moment of panic and lingering childhood instinct, I called my mother, Miriam. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was irritated. "What is it, Hazel?" "We are very busy." "Mom," I gasped, pressing my heavy flannel shirt against my leg to stop the bleeding. "It's deep. I need a ride to the emergency room. I can't drive my truck with my leg like this." There was a long, terrible pause on the line. Then, Miriam sighed. It wasn't a sigh of worry, it was a sigh of profound inconvenience. "Hazel, I really can't right now," she said, her tone smooth and reasonable, completely ignoring the panic in my voice. "Savannah has that big gala tomorrow night, and we are right in the middle of a major crisis with her dress fitting. The tailor completely botched the hem. Can you just call an Uber? Or put a bandage on it? You're always so dramatic about your little projects." She hung up. I sat alone in the freezing, dusty hallway of my ruined house, staring at the darkened screen of my phone. I didn't cry. The remaining scraps of hope I had that they might care about me simply evaporated. I tied a piece of electrical wire around my upper leg as a crude tourniquet, dragged myself to my truck, and drove myself to the hospital, leaving a trail of blood on the clutch pedal. I got 12 stitches that night. But more importantly, I got clarity. From that night on, the house was no longer just a renovation project. It was my sanctuary. It was a physical manifestation of my independence. Every nail I drove, every floorboard I sanded, was a brick in the wall keeping them out. When I finally finished the house a year later, the wide plank oak floors gleaming under the restored stained glass, it was a masterpiece. It was a fortress they had no part in building. And that, of course, was exactly why they decided they had to steal it. If you enjoyed Hazel's journey of building her strength so far, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment below with the name of the city you are living in right now. Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. 3 years passed after I finished the house. 3 quiet, peaceful years where I built my architectural restoration business and lived within my own structurally sound walls. Then, Savannah got engaged to Wyatt. Wyatt came from a prominent, wealthy family in a neighboring state, and the upcoming wedding immediately became the absolute center of my parents' universe. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a high-stakes corporate merger wrapped in white tulle. Vincent saw it as the ultimate elevation of his social status. The psychological encroachment began precisely 3 months before the wedding date. It started at one of the mandatory Sunday dinners at my parents' sprawling, sterile mansion. I only attended these dinners a few times a year, mostly out of a grim sense of obligation and to keep an eye on their maneuvering. The dining room air was heavy with the smell of roasted beef and Miriam's expensive, cloying perfume. Vincent was carving the meat at the head of the table, his face already flushed from the early afternoon bourbon. Savannah sat across from me, repeatedly twisting her massive diamond ring under the chandelier light to ensure everyone noticed the sparkle. "So, Hazel," Vincent said, not looking up from the roast. He used a casual tone that I instantly recognized as highly calculated. "Savannah and Wyatt are going to need a proper place to start a family. They are looking at real estate, but frankly, nothing on the market has any real character." I took a slow sip of my water, keeping my face entirely neutral. "I am sure they will find something lovely," I replied safely. Vincent paused his carving knife. "Well, you have that massive house all to yourself over on Juniper Avenue. Seems like an awful lot of space and maintenance for just one single woman." It wasn't a question. It was a probe, a soft insertion of an idea to test the perimeter defenses. Miriam chimed in immediately, right on cue. Her voice was syrupy, dripping with fake maternal warmth. "A family home is such a beautiful blessing, isn't it, Hazel? It is a legacy. Something to be shared with the people you love. We have always believed in keeping the family close and supporting each other." Legacy and shared resources were her preferred weapons. They were words designed to sound like generosity, but in my family, they were shaped exactly like a cage. Then Savannah giggled. She was picking at her salad with a silver fork. "It is true, Hazel. Wyatt and I were just talking about your house the other day. That gorgeous, south-facing room you use for your drafting studio, it gets the absolute best morning light. It would be just perfect for a nursery. We could paint it a soft yellow." I put my fork down. The click of the silver against the porcelain plate sounded incredibly loud in the sudden, expectant quiet. The three of them looked at me, forming a smiling, deeply unified tribunal. This was the exact moment the performance was supposed to begin. According to their script, I was supposed to blush, look honored, and graciously offer up the fruits of my 6 years of agonizing labor for my sister's happiness. "That is my workspace," I said, my voice perfectly even, devoid of any emotion they could use against me. "And that is my house. It is not available for anyone else." The smiles flickered and died. Savannah immediately thrust her bottom lip out into a practiced pout, a look of profound disappointment she had perfected when she was 5 years old. Vincent's jaw tightened visibly, and he went back to violently sawing at the beef. Miriam's face went smooth and blank, which was her most dangerous expression. "Well," Miriam said, forcing a tight, breathless laugh. "Let us not talk about serious things right now. More potatoes, Vincent?" The subject was dropped for the evening, but the seed was planted. The cold shoulder began the very next day. They stopped inviting me to wedding planning events. They stopped calling to check in. I recognized the classic gaslighting tactic immediately. They were trying to isolate me, to make me feel the freezing draft of their disapproval so intensely that I would eventually cave and offer the house just to be allowed back into the warmth of the family circle. But they fundamentally misunderstood me. I had built my own fire. I didn't need their warmth anymore. The situation escalated from passive-aggressive manipulation to outright hostility on a Tuesday afternoon. I was 30 miles away, standing on scaffolding at a client's Victorian restoration project, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a motion alert from the security camera I had installed above my front door at 47 Juniper Avenue. I pulled off my work gloves and opened the app, expecting to see a delivery driver dropping off a package. Instead, my blood ran instantly cold. I was looking at my front porch, the solid oak deck I had sanded and stained by hand. Standing on it, laughing brightly, was Savannah. Beside her was Wyatt. And standing next to them was a woman I didn't recognize, holding a leather clipboard and pointing critically at my custom-built front door. I turned up the volume on my phone. The camera's microphone picked up their conversation perfectly. "The bones are fantastic," the woman with the clipboard was saying. She was clearly a real estate agent. "But to maximize the open concept feel for entertaining, we would definitely want to knock down that dividing wall between the kitchen and the living room. It is just too closed off and dated right now." Savannah nodded enthusiastically, completely ignoring the fact that I had spent 4 months meticulously restoring that specific load-bearing wall to its original historical specifications. "Oh, absolutely," Savannah said. And all this dark wood is just so gloomy and depressing. Wyatt thinks we should paint all the original trim bright white to modernize it. I felt a physical wave of nausea, followed immediately by a sharp, burning fury. They weren't just trespassing. They were appraising my property. They were planning the demolition of my life's work while standing on my front porch. I didn't hesitate. I hit the microphone button on the camera app. "Step away from my door," I said. My voice echoed loudly through the small speaker above them, cutting through the quiet neighborhood air. Savannah jumped, clutching her expensive handbag. Wyatt looked startled, scanning the porch ceiling until he spotted the camera lens. "Hazel?" Savannah called out, recovering quickly and putting on her brightest, most innocent voice. "Oh, do not be silly. We were just in the neighborhood looking at paint colors and thought we would bring an appraiser by to get a sense of the market value. Just for insurance purposes, you know? For the family portfolio." "You do not own this property," I said, my voice dangerously flat. "And there is no family portfolio. You have exactly 30 seconds to get off my property before I call the local police and have all three of you arrested for trespassing." The real estate agent looked horrified. She immediately took a massive step backward, realizing she had been lied to about who owned the house. Savannah's fake smile vanished, replaced by an ugly, twisted skull. "You are being completely ridiculous and selfish," Savannah yelled at the camera. "Dad said we could look at it. You are ruining everything, as usual." She grabbed Wyatt's arm, and the three of them scurried off my porch and retreated down the walkway to their parked car. I watched them drive away, but my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. I left my job site immediately. I drove straight to the industrial hardware store downtown and spent $300 on the heaviest, most complicated, drill-resistant deadbolts they sold. I spent the entire evening ripping out my old locks and installing the new ones, the whine of my power drill echoing through the empty house. Every screw I drove into the solid wood frames felt like I was barricading myself against a siege. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house settling sounded like footsteps on the porch. The next morning, the digital bombardment began. Vincent sent me a long, aggressively worded email disguised as paternal concern. He wrote that my behavior toward my sister was deeply troubling and a sign of mental instability. He stated, in writing, that the family had invested heavily in my upbringing, and it was time for me to show a return on that investment by doing the right thing for Savannah. Miriam flooded my phone with texts. She didn't yell. She weaponized guilt. She wrote, "Hazel, please. Savannah is crying constantly. Her wedding is weeks away, and you are giving her an incredible amount of stress. Why do you hate your family so much? Just give her the house. You can always buy another little fixer-upper. Do not make a scene and ruin her special day." I didn't reply to any of them. I recognized the pattern. They were building a narrative where I was the unstable villain holding the family hostage, and they were the exhausted, reasonable victims. I realized they were setting a trap for the wedding itself. They knew I wouldn't hand over the deed in private. They were going to use the immense pressure of a public audience to force my compliance. I needed a shield that was stronger than oak and deadbolts. I needed the law. I called Julian, my contractor friend, and asked for a recommendation. He gave me the number for Carmen, the most ruthless property and litigation attorney in Arbor Town. I met Carmen in her downtown office, a sleek space made of chrome and black leather. I laid out a massive binder on her desk. Inside was the original deed of sale in my name only, 3 years of property tax records paid from my personal bank account, and hundreds of receipts for lumber, copper piping, and electrical wire. I also gave her printouts of Vincent's emails and Miriam's texts. Carmen reviewed the documents with terrifying speed. She didn't offer me sympathy, she offered strategy. "Your legal ownership is ironclad," she said, tapping her expensive pen against the desk. "But you're dealing with a wealthy narcissist. Men like your father do not believe the word no applies to them. They view boundaries as personal insults to be destroyed. He is not going to stop just because you ignore him. He will try to leverage his social power at the wedding to box you in. So what do I do?" I asked, feeling a cold knot of dread in my stomach. "Do I skip the wedding?" Absolutely not, Carmen said, her eyes locking onto mine. If you do not show up, he will stand in front of 300 people and announce that you graciously agreed to give away the house, but were too shy or emotionally unstable to attend. He will create a public verbal contract, leverage the crowd's goodwill, and then use his high-priced lawyers to bury you in fraudulent transfer lawsuits until you run out of money and give up. She leaned forward. You have to go. You have to stand in that room, and when he tells the lie, you have to loudly, clearly, and publicly refuse. You have to break the narrative in front of his audience. Let him show everyone exactly who he is when he doesn't get his way. We need his coercion documented. I left her office feeling terrified, but entirely resolved. I was not going to be a victim anymore. I was going to be the wall. I spent the next 2 weeks in absolute silence, preparing myself mentally for the impact. I didn't know the impact would be a physical assault that would send me flying through a glass table. But I knew I would not break. The memory of the ballroom shattered into fragments of light and pain, snapping back into focus under the harsh, humming, fluorescent lights of the emergency room. The smell of wild mountain flowers and expensive bourbon was completely gone, replaced by the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic bleach and the bitter smell of burned coffee from the hallway machine. I was sitting on the edge of a paper-lined examination table, my dark navy dress stiff and crusty with dried blood around the collar. A doctor with exhausted eyes was finishing his work behind me. Well, it is a very clean laceration, he said, his voice muffled by his surgical mask. But it went right down to the bone. I had to put in 7 metal staples to close the wound on your scalp. He moved around to my front, holding a pair of long tweezers. He carefully extracted the last tiny, glittering shard of broken table glass from my bruised right shoulder. You also have a mild concussion, Hazel. You were right on the absolute edge of blacking out. Your shoulder and ribs are severely bruised from the impact. Someone hit you very hard. My father, I said. My voice sounded strange and hollow to my own ears, like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. He shoved me through a glass table. The doctor just nodded grimly. He dropped the glass shard into a metal tray with a sharp clink. We are legally required to report violent assaults to the local authorities, you know. I know, I said. I want you to report it. Where are the police officers? Waiting right outside your curtain, he said, applying a large white square bandage to the side of my head. You are stable, but we need to keep you here for observation for at least a few hours. A nurse will be right in to check your vitals. He stepped out, and a young nurse in blue scrubs immediately bustled in. She hooked a blood pressure cuff to my good arm. As the machine whirred, she glanced at my phone, which a paramedic had recovered from the ballroom floor and placed on the small tray table next to me. The screen was lighting up continuously, vibrating so hard it was slowly inching its way toward the edge of the table. You are incredibly popular tonight, the nurse said with a tight, nervous smile. Then she looked at my face. She really looked at me, her eyes darting from my bruised shoulder to the stark white bandage on my head. Her eyes widened in sudden, profound recognition. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. You are her. You're the woman from the wedding video. I stared at her, my head throbbing in rhythm with my heartbeat. What video? I asked. She fumbled frantically in the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out her own phone. It is absolutely everywhere. My teenage daughter just sent it to me 10 minutes ago. She held her screen up so I could see. It was a video, already slightly grainy from being downloaded and reshared thousands of times across the internet. It was the angle from the young man standing at the hotel bar. It showed my father's arrogant toast. It showed me walking forward in my dark dress. It showed the argument, perfectly picking up my voice echoing in the silent room. And then it showed the horrific, violent shove. It showed my body launching backward and exploding through the glass table. It captured the sickening sound of the crash and the immediate, chaotic screaming of the guests. It went out live on a massive streaming platform, the nurse said, her voice shaking with awe and horror. Look at the view count. I squinted at the numbers at the bottom of the screen. It wasn't 5,000. It wasn't 50,000. It was 5 million views. 5 million people had watched my father assault me. My God, the nurse said, scrolling rapidly through the comments. The hashtag Juniper Justice is trending #1 nationwide. People are furious. Honey, the entire world just saw what that monster did to you. The buzzing on my own phone finally stopped, only to immediately start vibrating again. The isolation my family had tried to build around me was gone. I wasn't fighting in the dark anymore. The lights were on. The police officers came in next. There were 2 of them, and they had none of the doctor's clinical detachment. They looked visibly angry. They told me they already had multiple high-definition cell phone videos of the incident from other guests, and that Vincent had been detained at the hotel. They asked the official question, did I want to press charges? I thought of the word selfish. He spat in my face. I thought of the glass tearing into my skin. I said yes. Absolutely. I was officially discharged at dawn. The sky over Arbor Town was a pale, bruised gray. As I walked out into the ambulance bay, the heavy staples itching terribly in my scalp, I saw Julian. He was leaning against the hood of his battered work truck. He wasn't wearing his usual dusty flannel shirt. He was wearing a dark press suit. He looked solid, like a load-bearing wall. He didn't rush over with empty apologies or pity. He just opened the passenger door for me. I got in. He walked around, got into the driver's seat, and handed me a cup of black coffee. How is the head? He asked quietly. Stapled, I replied. Okay, he nodded. He put the truck in gear. I already called Carmen. She is waiting for us at her office right now. We are going straight there. On the drive downtown, I finally unlocked my phone. It was choked with hundreds of unread messages. But one notification stood out. A 3-minute voicemail from my mother, Miriam. I put it on speakerphone so Julian could hear. The audio started with the sound of hysterical, gasping sobs. Hazel, oh my God, Hazel, what have you done? Miriam's voice wailed through the small speaker. You called the police? You had your own father arrested at your sister's wedding? You have completely destroyed this family. You ruined Savannah's perfect day. Your father is in a holding cell and his blood pressure is probably sky high. He just lost his temper for one tiny second because you were provoking him and embarrassing us in front of everyone. You have to call the police right now and tell them it was a misunderstanding. You have to drop these charges immediately. Family comes first, Hazel. If you do not fix this, I will never forgive you. She didn't ask if I was alive. She didn't ask how many stitches I needed. She demanded I protect my abuser. Julian's knuckles turned bone white on the steering wheel. Do not delete that, he growled. I won't, I said, my voice completely devoid of tears. It is evidence. We arrived at Carmen's office as the sun fully breached the horizon. Carmen was already sitting at her desk, looking sharp and incredibly dangerous. I played the voicemail for her. Excellent, Carmen said, her face an impassive mask. She is not apologizing. She is using emotional coercion to force a victim to drop a felony assault charge. Save the audio file and email it to me immediately. Carmen spun toward her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Here is the reality of your situation, Hazel. Your father is currently out on bail, but his ego is severely wounded. Wounded narcissists are desperate and highly destructive. He will try to retaliate financially. Our first move is defensive. I am filing an emergency permanent restraining order against Vincent, Miriam, and Savannah, barring them from coming within 500 feet of you or 47 Juniper Avenue. She hit a key with a loud clack. Second, I am filing a temporary injunction against any transfer of title on your property and notifying the county recorder directly. As of right now, your house is in complete legal lockdown. He could not sell it, leverage it, or claim it if he tried. Your fortress is secure. Now, she said, turning to look at my bandaged head, we go on the offensive. The Summit Crown Hotel had a standard policy for their ultra-expensive wedding packages. A lavish post-wedding brunch hosted the morning after in the same grand ballroom. Despite the violence of the previous night, my family, driven by an insane dedication to keeping up appearances, had decided to proceed with the brunch as if nothing had happened. They were banking on the polite silence of wealthy society. They assumed the guests would simply eat their expensive omelets, whisper behind their napkins, and pretend the assault was just an unfortunate, quickly forgotten family stumble. They were wrong. At 10 o'clock the next morning, I walked back through the heavy wooden doors of the grand ballroom. I had showered, carefully washing the dried blood from my hair, but I made absolutely no effort to hide the wound. I wore a simple, elegant black dress, and the thick white medical bandage was a stark, screaming contrast against my dark hair. I walked in first. Carmen, carrying a sleek black laptop and a portable digital projector, walked beside me. Julian walked right behind us, his imposing presence serving as a silent warning to anyone who might try to interfere. The ballroom was perhaps a quarter full. About 50 guests were clustered in uneasy, whispering groups near the mimosa bar. The thousands of wild mountain flowers were still in their vases, but they were a day old now. The heavy perfume was still there, but underneath it, I could smell the faint, unmistakable scent of decay. The whispers died instantly the second my shoes clicked on the stone floor. Every eye in the room locked onto the white bandage on my head. I saw Vincent immediately. He was standing near the buffet line, holding a glass of bourbon, an incredibly dark drink for 10 in the morning. He was trying to perform. He was laughing too loudly at a joke no one else found funny, attempting to force his reality onto the room. When he saw me, the fake laughter died in his throat. The flush of the alcohol darkened his face. He tried to reclaim his power using the only tool he knew, public humiliation. "Well, look who decided to show up," Vincent snarled, his voice a low, gravelly bark that carried easily across the silent room. He gestured at my bandaged head with his bourbon glass. "Looks perfectly fine to me. You always did love being overly dramatic and making everything about yourself, Hazel." A few of the guests actually winced. They looked down at their plates, profoundly embarrassed and horrified. This was not the charming, philanthropic Gregory Hart they thought they knew. They were finally seeing the monster without the mask. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Carmen ignored Vincent completely. She walked with terrifying purpose to the exact center of the room, right to the open space in front of the head table where the shattered glass had been swept away just hours before. She set her digital projector down on a small cocktail table. She unrolled a portable white screen. The hotel manager, looking pale and sweating profusely, rushed over and practically tripped over himself to plug her power cord into a floor outlet. The guests watched in utter confusion. This presentation was definitely not on the brunch itinerary. Julian stood with his arms crossed near the entrance, blocking anyone from leaving. I walked over to a chair near the front and sat down, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I just waited. Vincent watched Carmen, his eyes narrowing in suspicion and rising panic. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, stepping forward. "A slideshow? The wedding is over. Turn that off." Carmen finished connecting her laptop. She clicked a key, the projector whirred loudly, and a blinding white square of light hit the screen. "Good morning, everyone," Carmen said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was so incredibly cold and precise that it commanded absolute silence. "Thank you for attending." Mr. Hart was just kind enough to offer his version of events from last night, classifying them as a dramatic overreaction. We felt it was important to review the actual facts. She clicked the wireless mouse. The hotel's insurance company, terrified of a massive liability lawsuit, had handed over everything to the police, and Carmen had legally acquired the copies. An image appeared on the screen. It wasn't the shaky, vertical cell phone video from the internet. It was the time-stamped, ultra-high-definition security footage from the camera mounted directly in the ceiling of the ballroom. The God's eye view. The video started playing. Because it was the master file, it had pristine, amplified audio captured by the ceiling microphones. "You will not embarrass this family," Vincent's voice roared from the laptop speakers, a raw, terrifying animal snarl filling the quiet brunch. "It is my house." "It is mine," my voice replied, clear and steady. "Not anymore," he bellowed. And then the room watched the assault happen from a completely unobstructed, perfect angle. They saw the vicious grab. They saw the pivot. They saw the violent, full-bodied thrust. They watched my body fly backward through the air. And then, the sound. The microphones picked up the horrific, percussive crash of my back breaking the thick glass, followed instantly by the sickening snap of my head hitting the metal frame of the table. A woman in the front row screamed a high, thin sound and covered her eyes. A man near the back loudly swore in horror. But Carmen didn't stop the video. She let it play for 10 more seconds of chaos. And the high-definition angle revealed the most damning detail of all. It showed Savannah. While I lay bleeding profusely in a pile of shattered glass, the video clearly zoomed in on my sister. She didn't look at me. She didn't scream for a doctor. She was looking out at the crowd, her face completely calm for a split second as she checked her reflection in a silver serving tray, before forcing her hands to her face to begin fake, theatrical crying for the audience. Carmen paused the video on a frozen, split-screen frame. On the left, Vincent's face, twisted into a mask of pure, demonic rage. On the right, Savannah, calmly checking her makeup while her sister bled out feet away. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than concrete. Vincent was frozen, his bourbon glass trembling violently in his hand. Miriam was staring at the floor, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Wyatt, Savannah's husband of less than 24 hours, had been standing near the buffet. He looked at the frozen image on the screen. He looked at the blood on my bandage. He looked at Savannah, who was trying to reach for his hand, her face pale with panic. Wyatt looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. He literally took a step backward, avoiding her touch. He reached up to his lapel, ripped the white wedding boutonniere off his expensive suit, dropped it on the floor, and simply turned and walked out the heavy ballroom doors without looking back. His parents immediately followed him. The public execution was complete. The lie was dead. The fallout did not sound like a loud explosion. It sounded like the quiet, inevitable structural collapse of a rotten building. The first domino to fall was financial. By Monday morning, the Arbor Town City Council held an emergency session. Vincent's company, Pioneer Ridge Developments, was the primary contractor on 3 massive urban renewal projects. With the horrific video of the CEO committing felony assault looping endlessly on every local news channel and dominating internet forums, the council unanimously voted to sever all ties and suspend the contracts immediately, citing a severe breach of moral clauses. By noon that same day, the major commercial bank that held the primary line of credit for Vincent's development empire announced it was freezing all of his corporate accounts pending a full audit. The lifeblood of his business was completely choked off. On Wednesday, the board of directors for Pioneer Ridge Developments held a closed-door meeting. It lasted less than 2 hours. They voted unanimously to oust Vincent as CEO and president, effective immediately. He was stripped of his salary, his massive stock options, and all of his corporate signing power. He was escorted out of his own building by security. He was an emperor left with absolutely no empire. The second domino was social. The Hart name, which had been a symbol of elite philanthropy and unassailable power in Arbor Town for decades, became violently toxic overnight. The board of the children's charity that Miriam had chaired for 15 years quietly sent an email removing her name from their letterhead. Invitations to country club dinners, charity galas, and gallery openings simply vanished. Their wealthy friends, terrified of being associated with the viral scandal, cut them off with surgical precision. The silence from their social circle was absolute. The third domino was Savannah. Wyatt's family moved with ruthless, wealthy efficiency. They hired a massive public relations firm and a team of vicious divorce lawyers. 2 weeks after the wedding, a society blogger posted a verified update. Wyatt had filed for an annulment, legally arguing that he had been defrauded into marrying into a dangerously toxic and criminally abusive family. Savannah had been forced to move out of the luxury penthouse Wyatt's family owned. A month later, Julian told me a rumor he heard from a supplier at the lumber yard. Savannah had quietly packed her bags and moved out of state, somewhere on the East Coast. There was no farewell party. No one saw her off. She simply vanished, like an actress who had missed her cue and retreated from a dark, empty stage. She had lost her audience, and without an audience, she simply ceased to exist. The criminal trial took place 6 months later in the dead of winter. The courtroom was an exercise in stark contrasts. The wood paneling was dark, stained by a century of serious, heavy decisions. The lighting was the flat, humming, clinical white of fluorescent tubes. I sat at the prosecution table, wearing a dark gray suit. The scar on the side of my head was completely healed, hidden safely beneath my hair. Carmen sat directly behind me, her files organized into neat, lethal stacks. Julian sat in the gallery right behind the wooden partition, his broad shoulders filling the bench, acting as my silent foundation. Across the aisle, Vincent sat with his legal team. He looked physically diminished. The arrogant flush of bourbon and power was completely gone, replaced by a gray, papery pallor. He had lost significant weight. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. He looked like exactly what he was, a small, angry old man. Miriam sat 2 rows behind him, staring blankly at the back of his head. She never once looked in my direction. Vincent's expensive defense lawyers tried exactly what Carmen predicted. They attempted to build an argument out of fog and forced sentimentality. They paced in front of the jury, trying to paint a picture of a loving, generous patriarch who had simply consumed too much alcohol and experienced a tragic, momentary lapse in judgment during an emotional family dispute. They argued it was a private matter that never should have been brought to criminal court. The district attorney didn't argue with them. She just let the evidence speak. She called Carmen to the stand. Carmen was an absolute weapon of facts. The DA projected a timeline on the courtroom wall. She presented the original deed to 47 Juniper Avenue, proving my sole ownership. She presented 3 years of my bank statements, highlighting every single penny I spent on lumber, roofing, and property taxes. Then, she presented the authenticated text messages between Savannah and Miriam, clearly discussing the plan to announce the gift at the wedding specifically to force my hand and ensure I could not say no in front of a crowd. The timeline was utterly brutal. The jury watched as the DA connected the dots. It wasn't an accident. It was a premeditated conspiracy to commit theft. And when the victim publicly refused to be robbed, the abuser enacted a violent, calculated physical punishment. The jury deliberated for exactly 45 minutes. When the foreman stood up, he looked directly at Vincent, not me. On the charge of felony assault in the 2nd degree, we find the defendant guilty. A low, animal wail tore from Miriam's throat in the gallery. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just let out a long, slow breath that felt like I had been holding it in my chest for 12 years. The crushing weight was gone. The judge slammed his gavel, revoking Vincent's bail and remanding him into state custody to await sentencing for prison time. The monster was finally behind bars. The following spring, the air in Arbor Town finally felt clean. I was standing on the front porch of my house at 47 Juniper Avenue. The sun was setting, casting a deep, bruised purple and gold light over the distant mountains. The house was no longer just a silent fortress meant to keep people out. It was breathing again. Julian and I had officially transformed the entire ground floor. Every Saturday, we hosted the Juniper Restoration Workshops. We opened the massive oak doors to women recovering from domestic abuse and young people trying to find their footing. We taught them how to use power planers, how to mix proper mortar, and how to read the history and strength inside a piece of salvaged wood. We taught them how to build things that last, and more importantly, how to build their own internal boundaries. The house was filled with the sounds of careful work, of questions and answers, of sawdust and creation. It was a living, breathing sanctuary. I walked inside and moved to the main staircase. The late afternoon sun was pouring directly through the massive, Gothic stained glass window on the landing, the window I had spent an entire month meticulously releading and soldering back together after finding it shattered in a salvage yard. The light it threw onto the restored oak floor was breathtaking. It was a solid pool of liquid ruby, deep emerald, and brilliant cobalt. It was the physical, undeniable proof of what you can do with your own two hands. You can take the broken, shattered, discarded pieces of your life, and with enough patience and brutal labor, you can make them whole again. You can make them throw light. I walked back outside to the porch. I held a small, heavy rectangular object and a power drill. I lined the object up against the main wooden pillar of the porch, the pillar I had hoisted and set myself years ago. I drove 2 brass screws into the wood, the drill whining with a satisfying finality until the screws were perfectly flush. I stepped back and read the words on the custom-ordered brass plaque. The simple, dark letters shined in the evening light, Juniper 47. Restored by Hazel Reyes. My name. On my work. On my foundation. I was no longer the shadow in someone else's play. I was the architect of my own life. Some distant relatives still message me, saying I went too far by pressing criminal charges and destroying my father's business over a moment of anger. They say blood is thicker than water. So, I have to ask you, am I the asshole for letting my father go to prison, or did I simply give him the exact foundation he laid for himself? Let me know your verdict in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If Hazel's journey of building her own walls and shattering their lies resonated with you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Stay strong, build your own foundation, and I'll see you in the next video.